tweet emotion. The social media giant says it is fact-checking President Donald Trump's tweets. How the White House is responding. National security law. China's communist government issues a ruling on the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Serious concerns. The Archdiocese of Baltimore reacts after a county in Maryland effectively outlaws the distribution of communion during the pandemic. And path to sainthood. We hear more about the founder of the Knights of Columbus from the organization's current leader. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 28th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump is preparing an executive order targeting social media. He is also monitoring the ongoing violence in Minnesota that was sparked by the death of an unarmed black man being arrested by police. And he is giving his condolences to the nation, which has just lost more than 100,000 people to COVID-19. Correspondent Owen Jensen reports from the White House. Owen?
Tracy, a very busy day here at the White House. The goal of that executive order, curb liability protections for social media companies. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany discusses the Twitter controversy.
Twitter's head of site integrity has tweeted that there are, quote, actual Nazis in the White House, and no fact-check label was ever applied to this absolutely outrageous, offensive, and false claim.
The president recently tweeted, "There is no way, zero, that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent." Twitter added an exclamation point with these words, "Get the facts about mail-in ballots." Any action the president takes will likely face legal challenges. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, violent protests, looting, and fires triggered by the death of George Floyd, a black man gasping for breath during an arrest in which an officer kneeled on his neck. The feds say they're conducting, quote, a robust criminal investigation.
And we're going to get a very full report, but a very sad day.
And a somber milestone, as more than 100,000 Americans have died due to COVID-19. Among them,
the smile, the pose, the smile.
Emilio De Palma, drafted at 18 from Massachusetts, a guard at Nuremberg. He fought the Germans on the front lines.
One of the first things that happened to him was a bullet went right by him, just missed him. He described that the sound of that bullet was unforgettable.
And more bad news for jobs. Roughly 2.1 million people applied for unemployment benefits last week. But first-time applications have fallen for 8 straight weeks. Also on Twitter, President Trump extended his heartfelt sympathy to friends and family of those who've died due to COVID-19, saying, quote, God be with you. Tracy?
Okay. Thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you again. On Capitol Hill, House members are passing bills including a bipartisan measure to modify the Paycheck Protection Program and a human rights bill punishing top China officials for detaining people in internment camps. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, it was a roller coaster ride with regard to FISA reform. It was big news today that the House voted to send the FISA reform bill to conference. That basically means that they're going to debate the issue and also come back with some real reform. You may recall it was just last night that House Democrats decided to abandon the bill after President Trump tweeted out that he would veto the bill if it came to his desk.
The president said he would veto the bill, so all of the Republicans then abandoned their commitment to security.
The House abruptly adjourned last night without considering the surveillance bill. The Democratic Congressional Progressive Caucus also opposed the legislation for permitting online surveillance without warrants. But Speaker Nancy Pelosi blames Republicans for blocking it.
This has always been bipartisan, and I don't have any intention of departing from the fact that on FISA bills, we are always going to have to go in a bipartisan way. And if the Republicans were abandoning their commitment to that because of the president, that means we could not override his veto.
Republican Devin Nunes tells me the bill needs one key reform: give lawmakers access to documents from the secret FISA court.
That's the most important reform, is to ensure that those members that are trusted to be on the Intelligence Committee, both Republicans and Democrats, have instant access to the court documents. I think if they don't, I think we're going to continue to have a problem. That has to stay in there and be reinforced.
Nunes and House Republicans are calling for a hearing to determine comprehensive reforms to fix FISA. Yesterday, the House overwhelmingly passed the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act by a vote of 413 to 1. In a first, 70 Democratic House members cast their votes by proxy for that bill, a move criticized by Republican leader Kevin McCarthy.
Democrat Congressman Charlie Crist admitted he used the proxy vote to attend a space launch in Florida.
Leader McCarthy basically says that Congressman Crist essentially played hooky. I did contact Congressman Crist's office, and the spokesperson told me that the congressman sits on a number of committees that fund directly NASA, and that is why it was important for him to attend the launch. You may recall that that launch was scrubbed just minutes before takeoff. Tracy?
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill for us. Thanks again, Eric. And with the delayed launch of the SpaceX rocket, President Donald Trump says that he will be back on Saturday for the rescheduled liftoff.
It is such a great achievement for our country, and our country's number one. Again, NASA's done a fantastic job.
The president and first lady toured part of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, but the launch was scrubbed 16 minutes before liftoff because of thunderstorms. The two American astronauts had to stay strapped into their seats until the fuel could be unloaded. It is the first time a private company is taking astronauts to the International Space Station. The launch is now set for Saturday afternoon. China moves to quell protests in Hong Kong with a new security law. China's parliament today rubber-stamped a national security law for Hong Kong. It allows China's Communist Party to develop laws against secession, subversion, and foreign interference. Protesters say the law ends the core values that set Hong Kong apart from the rest of China. Hundreds of displaced Syrians have been blocked from returning home. Protesters took to the streets earlier this week demanding they be allowed to return home. Around 1 million people were displaced earlier this year during a government offensive in a rebel-held region. A ceasefire has been reached. However, Turkish forces remain, and Turkey is not allowing anyone to return. Alessandro Montadoro is director of Aid to the Church in Need in Italy. His organization helps persecuted Christians around the world, including in Syria. And he joins us now from his home in Salento. Alessandro, welcome back to the show. Can you give us an update on what's going on in Syria? And is there a timetable when the displaced people will be allowed to return home?
It's very difficult to give an update or at the same time, I can't spread an optimistic message because the war in Syria is unfortunately still present in spite of the indifference of the Western countries, in spite of the indifference of the international media. Unfortunately, in the northeastern area of the country, the fighting are prosecuting. And without the end of the war, it isn't possible to imagine also the return, the comeback of the people who were obliged in these years of war to leave country.
Alessandra, can you talk about how this is affecting Syrian Christians?
It's always the same problem because obviously all the Syrian population is suffering for the effects of war, but Christians and all the people who belong at the religious minority are suffering twice because not only are suffering the poverty, but suffered and now are in grave need also because they are not persecuted, because we can't talk about persecution in Syria, but a situation of discrimination also related to the economic impact, for instance, of the pandemic, is always present for the Christians in area like the Middle East or also in other countries. And so this is the reason for which now we are engaged trying to expand our aid program for them.
Alessandra, you mentioned that your group is helping. Can you talk a little bit more about what exactly you're doing?
At this moment, Aid to the Church in Need International, I want to remember at our viewers like Aid to the Church in Need is a pontifical foundation, is a pastoral charity, is helping the Christians in Syria with over 100 projects, small and bigger. And this is the moment in which, for the Syrian population, for the Christians, we are trying to increase our contribution, because not only the war, not only the effects of the economic sanctions of the embargo, I want to precise, unbearable and unacceptable, this kind of effects, but also the effect of pandemic. And so as a result, we decided past week to help over half, with over €500,000, more than 20,000 families, Syrian families. It's the way for us to help them to buy and to receive basket food, to receive masks of protection, to receive hygiene items, to receive also sanitizers, elements, products. It's the way, it's the contribution of the day to the church need to give them an option, opportunity to survive.
Well, Alessandro, thank you for your time today and all that you do. We appreciate it. Alessandro Montadoro, Director of Aid to the Church in Need in Italy. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.
Coming up, Archbishop Jose Gomez announces a reopening plan for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. All of Florida's prisoners on death row live in the Diocese of St. Augustine. Many are Catholic, and the bishop who visits them twice a year is calling for an end to the death penalty. In a letter, Bishop Felipe Estevez says our system of incarceration needs to change from inhumane punishment to hopeful rehabilitation. Everyone must be concerned that not a single innocent human is condemned to deadly execution. The state of California relaxed restrictions on churches this week, and the Diocese of Los Angeles now has a plan to reopen. Step one allows for adoration of the Blessed Sacrament and confessions while following social distancing. Churches have to be cleaned after each use, and volunteers will open doors and count parishioners. In step two, starting June 3rd, public masses, weddings, and funerals can resume, but choirs will be replaced by a cantor, and Holy Communion can be received by hand only. Meanwhile, in a county in Maryland reverses a policy that would have banned Catholic churches from distributing the Eucharist. The initial restriction was put in place as the county planned for the phased reopening of houses of worship. Correspondent Mark Irons joins us now with the latest developments. Mark?
Tracy, this guidance out of Howard County, Maryland, first called for no food or beverage consumption before, during, or after religious services, which effectively banned the distribution of communion. To that, we saw swift reaction from Catholics.
A Maryland county changes course after outcry over a decision that would have kept Catholics from receiving the Eucharist.
It is the source and summit of our faith, the Eucharist, and nothing is more important than that.
Lewis Brown, executive director of the Christ Medicus Foundation, tells us the original executive order out of Howard County, Maryland, would have violated religious freedom. He says church officials have already proposed guidelines for the safe distribution of communion.
Prohibiting communion in churches is not necessary to protect the public health.
Howard County says after Maryland Governor Larry Hogan announced a modified reopening of restaurants yesterday, it is changing its former guidance on houses of worship, stating, as we move closer to a full Phase 1 reopening, we will be lifting food consumption restrictions for faith institutions. The Catholic Association was among the groups concerned about the initial restrictions. The group's legal advisor, Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, is grateful church and government officials could reach a solution.
Whenever the church and the government work collaboratively for the good of the faithful and for the good of the community, we see great successes.
Howard County is in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. The Archdiocese says it is thankful for the reversal and called it essential that faith and government leaders work for the common good. Tracy?
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Mark. One new survey is highlighting the alarming toll the coronavirus pandemic is taking on Americans' mental health. According to the new data from the Census Bureau, 1/3 of adults surveyed are showing signs of clinical anxiety or depression. Joining me now on Skype to explore these findings is Dr. Cynthia Hunt, a psychiatrist and member of the Catholic Medical Association. Dr. Hunt, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's truly a privilege to be here.
Well, Dr. Hunt, what do you make of these findings, and how concerning are they to you?
They're terribly concerning, and this is something that experientially we in the mental health field have been seeing. It's not surprising with stress, trauma, financial losses, insecurity, the multiple changes that are occurring, not being able to have control. All of these things create the levels of anxiety that would be natural. And then many of us are going to be vulnerable to increased anxiety. The incidence of anxiety and depression were rising already. The incidence of suicides, particularly in young people, were already on the rise. Substance abuse, overdose deaths. So we add a pandemic to it, and unfortunately, it is alarming.
Yeah, and 100,000 people have died in the U.S. alone, and tens of millions of Americans are now unemployed. These are very heavy things to witness, let alone deal with personally. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Certainly, my heart and my prayers go out to those who have been affected by losses from the coronavirus, and those who have been very significantly affected through financial losses, illness. This is very traumatic. In some ways, it does meet levels of the trauma that we see that can result in PTSD. In our patient populations, those who are already suffering with depression or anxiety or substance use are struggling even more, understandably. The stay-at-home orders are certainly necessary and have been necessary, but unfortunately, they also can lead in many families to increased stress, increased depression and anxiety. The domestic violence rate has gone up. So the COVID situation has definitely impacted what we had already been experiencing, but to a great degree.
I know isolation has been extremely difficult for many people. Fortunately, some stay-at-home orders are now starting to lift. Do you think that could help, allowing people to once again have that human connection and socialize with each other in person?
Absolutely, especially with the churches reopening. And certainly when we look at mental health issues, we look at these from a biological, psychological, social, and spiritual dimension. Getting out more, number one, will help just with social connections. It's always a little different with social media, although that has been a blessing. Getting out more will help also with the spiritual connections with people, attending the sacraments, really for those of us who are Catholic and Christian, being able to be in community again. I think also what we need to be prepared for is that this, even though this is very, very good news that we're slowly reopening, there will be a sense of what we might call hypervigilance. We've been going these months without having touch, and I think there will be quite a bit of that still, that there will be hesitance on people's part regarding touch. There will be a certain sense of social distancing that will come as habit that will only gradually improve.
Yeah, well, Dr. Hunt, thank you so much for coming on the show. Definitely trying times for many of us. We appreciate your insight. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
Up next, the head of the Knights of Columbus reacts to an incredible development regarding the organization's founder. Tonight, we take a closer look at the life and legacy of Father Michael McGivney as he moves closer to possible sainthood. Yesterday, the Vatican announced it approved a miracle attributed to the intercession of Father McGivney, a Connecticut priest and founder of the Knights of Columbus, paving the way for his beatification. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, joins me now by Skype. Welcome back. Good to see you again.
Nice to be with you. Thank you very much.
So tell me, what did you think when you heard the news from the Vatican?
Well, of course, actually the first thing I thought of was Psalm 118. This is the day the Lord has made. It was a great joy for us. Of course, we've been praying for this for so many years. And finally, for Pope Francis to make the announcement was just terrific.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about Father McGivney, the man?
Well, Father McGivney was a young priest. He dedicated his life to charity and unity. We have accounts where the people in his neighborhood referred to him as a saint. He was seen as one of the true Good Samaritans, and he was just revered by his fellow priests and by his parishioners, and of course by the Knights of Columbus. So Father McGivney started the Knights of Columbus on the two principles of charity and unity. And for Father McGivney, he took a very explicit view of charity, and I would say was a view of a fraternal notion of charity, a fraternal approach to charity, so that he asked people to, especially the Knights of Columbus, look at your neighbor as a brother or sister, and if they're in need, reach out and try to help them. So if you ask Father McGivney, does charity begin at home? I think he would say, yes, it does. But your home needs to be large enough for everyone. And so it's not always easy. And that's why the church requires heroic virtue on the part of its saints.
I know he's remembered for protecting the faith, and certainly was not an easy thing to do during a time of anti-Catholic prejudice. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. It was very important for Father McGivney that his Knights of Columbus were patriotic, good citizens. He didn't want them to stay in the parish hall. He wanted them to go out, live their faith, put their faith in action, and make their communities better. So in order to do that, of course, you need religious liberty. And so Father McGivney was a very strong proponent of being good citizens and being engaged in public discussions of policies, but also we needed to have the religious liberty to be able to do that. And of course, if you think back on the history of the Irish immigrants who were coming to America, they had had their religious liberty denied them for centuries. So religious liberty was very important to them.
I know it's often said that Father McGivney was a man ahead of his time. Can we talk about how his vision, the Knights of Columbus, has made a difference in millions of people's lives?
Sure. You know, the Second Vatican Council, one of the great initiatives of the Council was to empower the laity to talk about the Church as the people of God, and that laymen and laywomen have an appropriate role in the Church. Father McGivney saw this at the end of the 19th century, and so he wanted to create an organization of laymen who would be united with the Church, who would be the strong right arm of their parish priests, but would themselves have their own proper autonomy, and to move forward in works of charity and, as I was saying, works of protecting the religious liberties of Catholics and other religious minorities themselves. And so Father McGivney never wanted to be the Supreme Knight. In fact, he only served as Supreme Secretary for a short time, make sure the paperwork was done right, but then he wanted to be the chaplain. And his two younger brothers, who are also priests, then became Supreme Chaplains to the Knights of Columbus after his death. So Father McGivney saw a role for laymen, and that really was many decades ahead of his time.
Father McGivney died amid a pandemic just like the one we're experiencing right now. How are the Knights helping those in need during this pandemic?
Well, we launched a new initiative with this pandemic called Leave No Neighbor Behind. We want to reach out, as I said, to our neighbors and see if they need help, see if there's special needs during this time, and where we can, try to meet those needs. So we put several $1 million into this program of stocking up food pantries and food banks, trying to make sure that maybe our isolated neighbors who having a difficulty getting to the store, getting the things they need. Somebody's there to help them. Also, blood donations are very important during the pandemic, and we've been giving thousands and thousands of units of blood. So helping with food, helping with special needs of people, helping blood donations, working with our medical heroes and making sure that we can give them support, and also working with our parishes. It's going to be a lot of work to reopen our churches, and we pray that we'll be able to reopen them as soon as possible. But when the day comes that we can do it safely, then I'm hoping and I'm sure that many of our members will be there as the strong right arm of their parish priest, helping them to do that.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you coming on to the show. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
And before we go tonight, a reminder, EWTN broadcasts Mass throughout the day. Mass airs at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. We are also airing other special programming, and you can find our schedule at EWTN.com. There you will also find Eucharistic adoration throughout the day. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.